welcome Councillor Stuart Hughes from Devon County Council and Mr Fewings, who will be here for items a bit later in the agenda. So if we can make a start, please. Mrs Young, apologies for absence, please.
We have apologies from Councillor Kemp, Councillor Musgrove and Councillor Moody.
Thank you. Is it actually apologies from Councillor Musgrave because we're past the 30th of September rather. Okay, thank you. Right. Item 2, confirmation of the minutes of the committee meeting held on the 22nd of June and notes of the informal meeting from the 27th of July on pages 1 to 10. We had recommendations to consider A, Devon Home Choice recommendation, which we put forward a recommendation to full council, to the hub committee that the council continues to be a member of Devon Home Choice. That decision was then endorsed by the hub. The performance management report, we noticed the performance figures shown in the Pentana report and that members have reviewed the information provided in the dashboards and provide feedback on to the portfolio holder on any additional measures required to scrutinise performance. That is all in order, isn't it, Councillor Edmonds?
Yes,
thank you. Right, item 3, declarations of interest. Everybody knows what to do, so does anybody have any declarations of interest? Speak now or as and when they come up in the meeting, please. Items requiring urgent attention, I've had none put forward. Public forum, we have a period of up to 15 minutes available to deal with issues raised by the public. Have we had any raised in time for this meeting? Okay, thank you. Right, the next item is traffic congestion in West Devon. If I could ask Councillor Hughes and Mr John Fewings if they'd like to come forward so people can see who they are, please. Just easier so people can see instead of talking to your backs. Right, Councillor Hughes is the portfolio holder for highways for Devon County. I think he has been for, I don't know whether it's 8 or 12 years.
Sorry?
8 or 12 years, Councillor Hughes, for highways. I know you've been a county councillor for a lot longer. Right, I believe there's going to be no presentation and so this is just going to be a Q&A, is that correct?
Yeah, we didn't receive anything from council, what you expected, but we knew you had some issues that you wanted both myself and John to attempt to try to address for you.
Okay.
So basically I should take far away.
A free-for-all. Right, oh look at all these microphones ready. Oh, yeah. Patrick, can you show how to do it? Thank you. Right, who would like to go first, members? Can you put your microphone down, please, Councillor Coulson? That's it. That's lovely. Thank you.
Hello. Afternoon. Thank you. Thanks for attending. Yeah.
Can I just ask, if when members ask questions, if you could say who you are, but more importantly, where you represent, so Councillor Hughes, Mr Fewings, know what bit of the geography of West Devon you're from.
So Councillor Andy Coulson, Tavistock North, which is exactly where we're sat now, funny enough. I suppose it'd be very helpful for us if you could give us a sort of general overview of how maintenance contractors for the the highways, how their license effectively to carry out works, and what the processes they have to go through to effectively book road traffic control and closing of a road or a lane in order to begin works, and the kind of timelines involved. Just as a sort of background, that'd be useful, I think. Thank you.
Can you hear that? Okay. Yep. So there are two main types of work on the highway. Road works, which are mainly road maintenance works, and street works, which are mainly utilities works. And the one that probably gives us the biggest problem is the street works with the utilities. The road works, we generally know a fair way in advance what we're going to do on the highway because we have to budget, design, do all that work. So it gives us time to go out to consultation and look at when's the best time to program the works, what's the best time of year, what's the best time of day, whether we need night works. Utilities and street works we have a slightly less control over. So what happens is the utility company will approach us and say, we'd like to dig up your road on this date. And because of the way the Highways and Streetworks Act is structured, it's difficult for us to say no. We have to have a fairly good reason. And if they're emergency works, mainly for gas and water, then we pretty much have to allow it to happen straight away. We don't have a choice. So that kind of sets the overall framework of how we do things. We've recently moved to a permitting system where we ask utility companies to apply for permits to work on the highway. So a subtle difference, but basically we give them a right to work on the highway and they effectively book the road space. And we're also taking the opportunity to centralise all our traffic regulation orders as well. So in the past, the neighbourhood highways officers have dealt with some traffic regulation orders. Our engineering design group and our term maintenance contractors have dealt with some of their traffic regulation orders. But by centralising them, we'll have a much better idea of what's happening on the network, because we'll have one person who's totally in control of all the different types of work.
May I just ask, following on from there, Mr. Fewings, that if, for example, a development is going ahead or something and they're having some utility works, is there not a system that can actually get them to work concurrently, one after the other, instead of having a 2-week break and then another set comes? Because a section along Plymouth Road last year was pretty much closed for months. And you'd have a couple of days where it might be free and, things like that. So is there not a system, and I know I'm looking for utopia in what I believe is the easy way to do this, that they book in and the permit system suggests that's what you're looking at more, is they book in so you can look at how many different groups are working. Because in Tavistock over the last year, we have had people working on coming into the town through from Peter Tavy. We've had them as you would come in from Launceston. We've had them as you would come in. So every main road around Tavistock and Whitchurch was blocked almost at the same time. I mean, it was incredible. And I think this is a lot of where this is coming from, with how some of these works are planned. And I think that's the bit we'd really like to know. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a meeting with all the major utilities companies at the beginning of each year to plan out what they're proposing to do on our network. And also we discuss what we're proposing and try and get them as joined up as we can. So for instance, if we're doing a major road scheme, we'll try and get utilities companies to work alongside us. And once we've put a new road surface in anyway, they're not allowed to go in except for emergencies for a specific period of time. So that's one way we try and reduce the number of roadworks that run continuously. We're also trying as hard as we can to get, when we close a road for any reason, to get in there and do all the works we need to. So we're trying to coordinate our own works better. But it is difficult because utilities companies quite often need to get in at short notice to deal with things like gas mains, waterworks, electricity, fibre optics. And there is a huge amount of infrastructure running underneath our roads, which unfortunately does break down on a fairly regular basis.
Hipsy, I think you'd had your hand up, please.
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. Thanks for coming to see us on this blustery day. I have a couple of questions and probably a couple of comments as well, really. I'm not sure whether you are aware, that West Devon has recently, or is in the process of completing a plan for West Devon, which is our new kind of roadmap, to use the political jargon, about how we want to proceed over the next few years. That was informed by a public consultation, which was actually quite well completed in a literal sense. One of the things that has come to my mind, looking at the public consultation results, depending how you measure the number of questions answered, between 15 and 27% of respondents commented unfavourably, mainly in the main towns, but not exclusively, about traffic congestion. This was often accompanied by comments, again, detrimental comments about overdevelopment, which is a planning issue and so on, I know, but I was wondering really whether you're aware that there's that degree of public feeling out there about traffic congestion. On the back of that, I would like to say, as a member of our DMNL committee, I'm surprised at the number of occasions when an application seems to hang on the response from Devon County Highways. And in my short experience, it's quite rare that a development is ever objected to on those grounds. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about A, traffic congestion and the public perception, and B, about how important highways issues are to planning applications and how that's dealt with, really.
Okay, so two quite different questions there. So the planning issue, I'm afraid I'm not a planner. I didn't realise planning was going to come up today, but I have done a little bit of planning work in the past. When I did planning work probably about 10 years ago, I recommended refusal on maybe a third of applications. The planning advice has changed considerably. It's much harder now to sustain an objection in the highways terms. I think probably that's true of all planning objections. So I think as a highway authority, we object to far fewer planning applications these days. And it is, I mean, Stuart covers the whole of Devon. I cover the south and west part of Devon. So I cover Torridge, West Devon, South Hams and Teignbridge. And within that area, there are a lot of towns, Teignmouth, Newton Abbot, Totnes, all have very similar congestion issues. And it's because they're quite often medieval street patterns, which aren't designed to deal with the level of traffic we have now. They quite often have major routes going through them. So here you've got the A386 and the A390. And over years, development has built up on the edges, and that's put increased pressure. So I'm very much aware of the congestion issues. What we try and do is, using our traffic signals, using our highway design, is to squeeze as much out of the highway as we can. But ultimately, there is a limit on how many cars you can get through a piece of road. And many of our roads are very close to capacity at the moment. And it only takes a small event, like roadworks, to cause big problems there. Did I answer both questions, or...?
I think you did, thank you very much, and you dodged between the two very nicely. I don't know, Madam Chair, if I can actually just ask a supplementary on that as well, please. I'm loath to go into any sort of detail in terms of examples and so on, but one of the things that is top of my mind in terms of the planning issue that I spoke of is an application that was brought before DMNL some time ago, where a residence was being proposed with a front door straight onto the highways. There was no objection to that from Devon Highways. In my opinion, it was actually quite dangerous. 2 days later, literally 2 days later, a car was on its roof, squeezed against that door. So in my opinion, that was clearly a very, very dangerous situation that appeared to have been let through. And that sort of thing worries me. I think there are several examples in the last few years where, in my humble opinion, planning applications have been approved on the back of a positive highway report, and actually turned out to be really quite dangerous.
I don't know the specifics of those,
No.
but
I'm just offering an example.
Yeah. But I mean, if you're willing to write them down and send them to me, or through the chairman.
Certainly.
I'm happy to pass them on to my planning colleagues. That would be helpful.
Good. Thank you very much.
Just before I ask Councillor Wood to come in, just going further on something that you said there, Mr. Fewings. I wonder if Councillor Hughes, or it may be yourself, Mr. Fewings, would know, how does county look at like an overall map, and when you're doing your future planning, so I'm not talking about today and tomorrow's applications, I'm talking about further down the line, how do you look at some of these developments that come through local plans, etc., and say, that one really should not go through because that road is at capacity, and when, for example, apart from lobbying, do people like the new road that's been built around Teignmouth to get the traffic, I think it's Teignmouth, isn't it? No, Newton Abbot, but you still hear the Pennine roundabout on Radio 2 every day. So how does that bit go through where, for example, the highways can say that that road, you cannot build that development, that just cannot happen because that road just cannot cope anymore with traffic. How does that bit of a plan come about, please?
Quite simply, I mean, that doesn't actually come to myself, and I don't think it comes to you either, John, does it? I mean...
We have a strategic planning team, which was based at County Hall, is now based at Great Moor House in Stoughton. And they look at the local transport plan, which is a yearly updated plan that goes to central government. It sets out our objectives. So things like how we want to promote cycling routes, where we want to build new sections of road. The King's Castle bypass near Newton Abbot was on the plans from about 1948. Just about a year before it was, we got the funding, I told someone it'll never be built because I just couldn't see it happening because we don't build bypasses anymore. But suddenly funding became available. And quite often that is how things happen in terms of strategic highways, is things sit on our local transport plan until funding's available and then we build them.
But I think the question you asked was about housing development, wasn't it?
It was about when people go through their local plans, and it probably is a bit strategic, really, is that looking at it, you know, do county have a policy where they look at these plans that are coming forward and say that development could put that road at overcapacity, and the area just cannot sustain, you know, because we don't want to become London, but, you know, the towns just cannot sustain the amount of traffic going through on the road.
Unfortunately, I'm not a planner. I didn't realise planning was going to come up today. So, but what I can do is, when I go back to the office, I can send you the links to our local transport plan, if that would be helpful, and our strategic planning documents. They're probably the best place to look.
Yeah, we've read some of those documents and we've had them presented as part of large developments. I can think of one out on Callington Road at the moment. But it's, for example, there may be, and it's not quite with us yet, so I don't think I want Mr. Brooks getting too carried away thinking, oh no, but the field opposite, I believe, is being looked at, and that's, you know, a greenfield site at the moment. It's not within a plan, but it's being looked at. And when does it become that somebody says, no, that is just a step too far?
Well, from my experience as a district councillor as well, the county council development management team would actually work with the district management team, and they would actually look at those applications in advance. And so that's where it should all happen, is between the talks between the district and the county. And that's before it comes to the planning stage and the members get involved.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, Lucy Wood from Buckingham Monacorum. So I'm afraid I've got a couple of questions as well. A little bit earlier you referred to the Highways Act being the thing that sort of prevents you from saying no to utility companies if they approach you. And I wonder if you could, did you say that?
The New Roads and Streetworks Act.
Oh, is it? Oh, sorry, okay. I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, basically, we have to give equal access to anyone who requests from a utility company or a developer, anyone who requests access to our highway network. And if we refuse that request, we have to have a very good reason for doing it. And so we do regularly refuse requests, or more often we seek to sit down with either utility company or developer and say, look, we don't want you to close this road at this period. And quite often we have embargoes over, say, summer periods or peak times, and we say we don't want you to close the road at these times, but this would be a better time. And also we do, as much as we can, try and coordinate so we don't have too many roadworks going on in the same place at the same time. We don't always get it right because there is so much happening on the highway network, but we do try to coordinate that work.
Thank you. Yeah, I can imagine. The more I'm listening to you, the more I'm thinking what a difficult job you have on your hands. And the other question from me was about speeding on the moors out in our rural areas, and particularly around where I am, we have livestock on the moors, and I'm constantly approached by residents asking about speed restrictions on moors, etc., etc. And that also, I understand, is really complex matter because we're talking about grazing rights, we're talking about, it can't be policed and all of that. But I just wonder what, if any opinions you have on that, or any planning, or what you talk about with speeding on the moors. Thanks.
Now you are talking to the right person. In 1994, I was working very closely with Dartmoor National Park on their traffic management strategy, and that was a joint document produced by Dartmoor National Park Association and Devon County Council. And part of that strategy is still around, but I'm not sure how easy it is to find a copy. That proposed a 40-mile speed limit on the central open moorland area, which I worked on for a period of about 3 years to get implemented. Did it in two phases. First we did the area around Princetown, then we looked at the area around Haytor and Widdicombe. That was extremely difficult to get the Department of Transport to approve that speed limit because we didn't want to use upright signs. We wanted to use painted roundels, and we didn't want to have them every 300 metres. We wanted to have them spaced out much of a far greater distance than that. So I think I had to meet with the Department of Transport probably about 9 times in London and about 4 times in Bristol to try and push that through. And each set of roundels on the highway across Dartmoor, the roundels are the 40-mile-an-hour painted roundels. Each pair of roundels had to be individually approved. I'd send 5 copies of the maps for those roundels off to the Department of Transport. So there was a stack of paperwork, probably about that high, I'd send off to them. The reason I've given you that history is because that demonstrates the difficulty. Most of our speed limits are aimed at urban areas, so our 20s and 30s. It's very difficult to implement speed limits in rural areas. And when we do try and do that, we try and do it sensitively without plastering the area in lots of signs. Most of our traffic calming arsenal and armoury is really aimed at urban areas as well. So road narrowing, road humps, those kind of things are out of place in rural areas. So we do look at problems, particularly on Dartmoor. So I meet with Dartmoor National Park probably once every 3 months to talk about traffic issues, and more recently talk about some of the congestion issues we've had over the COVID period. But yeah, rural speed limits are very difficult to get right.
Sorry, can I just ask, do you have, is anyone sort of coming up with any ideas about traffic calming in rural areas, sort of different measures than that would be approved in urban areas? Not really, no.
I mean, the best traffic calming, I live in Bobby Tracy, so I've driven up today across Dartmoor, through Widdicombe, Ponsworthy, Cator and Dartmead. The best traffic calming features are the old granite gateways, because they really make you think, because you don't want to hit them, and you only get 1 car through at a time. So those are ideal traffic calming features. Unfortunately, we can't replicate them legally. If they're historically there, that's fine. If they're not, then we can't introduce them.
I appreciate it. Very difficult.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Pearce, Councillor Yelland via a question that's been submitted to Mr Molyneux, then Councillor Coulson, who I've just stopped in his tracks, and Councillor Moyes, I've noticed, and Councillor Crozier. We'll all forget that order, so I've written it down, so I'll introduce you as and when. So, Councillor Pearce, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Councillor Terry Pearce from the Mary Tavy ward, which covers Peter Tavy, Mary Tavy and Brent Tor. In a lot of our moorland villages, the highway drainage system dates back to Victorian times. And with the increasing amount of heavy rainfall that we're getting during the winter now, a lot of these areas, the pipe work and the old stone drains cannot cope with the amount of rainfall. And I'm just wondering whether you've got any proposals to put forward money specifically for enlarging the under highway drains to cope with this. And Brent Tor in particular and Lytterton have really suffered last winter with this, to the point that Brent Tor's sewage system nearly got flooded, the sewage work. So I'm just wondering whether you are looking at enlarging the pipe work. I mean, we're not expecting all of them, but if there's one strategic area which was enlarged to carry the capacity when we get very high rainfall in a particular road, when the other drains in that road cannot cope with it, it would go into that one bigger pipe and get away. But, you know, it's a situation which is building through the winter in a number of our moorland villages. And I just wondered what proposals you've got. I mean, our highway engineer says, well, we'll do it when the money is available, but you know, this has been going on now for nearly 5 years in Brent Tor, and it's causing quite significant problems. And the damage to the road, the highway itself, you know, it's a case of penny wise, pound foolish, because the cost of repairing the highway where the flooding occurs is quite significant in some areas. Thank you.
Yes, so we have a capital drainage budget. It's not very big. And we also have a revenue drainage budget. So our capital drainage budget is looking at improvements to the drainage network. It's not just in villages, it's in some of our towns and some of the bigger conurbations as well. So the capital drainage budget is limited, but it's specifically set up to look at improvements to highway drainage systems. And we also have our revenue drainage budget, which involves clearing out our drainage systems. But again, that's a fairly limited budget. Revenue budget is always tight. We've just moved over to a different way of working recently, something called Doing What Matters. So we're looking at coordinating much more of our highways works locally from our neighbour depots. And alongside that, we will at some point be going out to the parish councils to ask what their priorities are in terms of... Now, I'm not going to pretend that we'll say to parish council, what do you want us to do, and then we'll do that. It's a two-way conversation, but we want to understand more what the community priorities are. And the Doing What Matters, we've moved away from having specific budgets for things like surface dressing, resurfacing, our micro asphalt programme, to looking much more at what does a section of road need, and quite often it needs a combination, like you say, of drainage works and resurfacing. So the drainage works keep the water off the highway, and then some resurfacing or top cover just to make sure it's sound. In the past, we've been much more aligned on programs like surface dressing. So we had a budget for surface dressing. It was much harder for the officers to get schemes to join up like that, but we are trying to make that easier to do now. But we don't have a lot of money. Tom Lee, I think, is your neighbourhood officer, and yeah, Tom tries to do as much as he can, but unfortunately the money he's got, we can't do much.
No, could I come back, Chair, if I may? I appreciate that. I mean, Tom he's got a very difficult job, and this is why I wonder whether county should be looking at giving you more money. I mean, your highways budget has been cut every year for the last probably nearly 20 years. Year on year, and we are suffering also from the contractor that you had prior to what's in place now, where a lot of areas the work wasn't done properly in drainage. But I think you need to be asking your county councillors to make money available for putting larger pipe work in, because this is what's going to be needed with the higher incidence of heavy rainfall we're getting in the winter now. Those pipes that are there, especially in Brent Tor and Peter Tavy, just can't cope with the rainfall at the time.
can I just? I think on that one, there's an opportunity for you to actually lobby your MP, because at the end of the day, it's government that gives us the money,
Yeah.
and our budget was cut by 20 million last year,
Yeah.
and so it's 20 million less to spend on the highway network in Devon.
Right.
I've canvassed my MP. I think he's fed up with hearing my voice every time I see him. I said, don't forget, we want more money.
Yeah.
There's the opportunity. It'll be a good recommendation from the Scrutiny Committee this afternoon to
Okay.
actually write to your MP and say you would wish to see more money being put into highways as part of the settlement, which will come to Devon County Council.
Okay,
I think the other thing, John, you forgot to mention, if we are doing any reconstruction of a road, then
Yeah.
of course we would look at the drainage then to
Yeah.
actually upgrade it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think it's important that you do consult with the parish councils. You know, this is something that since the Highways Office was closed here at Kilworthy some years ago, we've lost that link in a lot of cases, and I think that's very important that, you know, you do keep in touch with the parish councils, because they are the people on the spot that can see what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Mr Molyneux, could you read out Councillor Yelland's question, please?
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Yelland represents Oakhampton South. So I will read her question. A recent consultation was carried out with the Town Council and residents regarding the traffic congestion in Oakhampton Town Centre. It is noted that DCC are no longer considering the Town Centre access road as an option. However, options that came forward from DCC were rejected by the public, and I understand they won't be taken forward. Please can you advise what Devon County Council are intending to do to address the severe congestion in Oakhampton Town Centre? Thank you.
I think again there is a limit. I mean, particularly in Oakhampton, we've had three large shopping centres built just off the main street, which has put extra demand on the network. One thing we are doing is we're opening up the rail station, which would help, and I believe we've also got plans to put another station in Oakhampton in the future, which would help with commuting to Exeter. And in the longer term, again, there are plans to extend that rail network further. So, unfortunately, like I said earlier, these are medieval towns trying to cope with modern levels of traffic, and it is very difficult. But there are limits on what we can actually do. We have signals in the middle of Oakhampton, and we configure them. They're all on something called Mover, which is micro process optimized vehicle actuation, to try and understand where the demand is coming from and try and get people through the town centre as quickly as possible. But the bottom line is there is more traffic than those roads can cope with.
Thank you. Councillor Coulson, please.
Thank you. It follows on neatly from what you just said, actually. I was looking, I have looked, but I can't find, maybe you can point me in the direction of, what is the, how do we define at capacity in regards to a road, like a trunk road through Tavistock up to Southam, for example? When do we say that road is at capacity? Because it's, it can be quite subjective. What one resident thinks, because it's a lot worse than it was 20 years ago, it's over capacity. Another person who's moved from London thinks it's not that bad. When do we say this road is at capacity?
So there are capacity figures for different types of road. That's easier for things like motorways, dual carriageways, where they're pretty much a standard width and configuration. It's harder for towns where you have all sorts of things happening, like buses stopping, people parking, people walking across the road. So it's a bit of a judgment, really, about what the capacity of that road is, trying to understand how many vehicles you can get through. But what we do know is a lot of our town centres are very close to that limit of capacity. And like you were saying before, I think one of the reasons you called us here today is it only takes one or two small events to tip the balance, and then you find that the whole town centre very quickly jams up. So I'm afraid I don't have a magic answer, but we do understand that many of our town centres are at or close to capacity, and we try and do as much as we can to try and aid that, but there are limits on what we can do.
So if I just may follow up, so I mean officially there's no like actual 1,000 cars an hour, 2,000 cars an hour. There's nothing like that. It's a judgment call between, as you say, what's going on in the town. There might be bus stops along the route, where it is, and so on. There's no definitive number.
There are figures, definitive figures, and I can try and find those and point them out to you, so I could pass those on. But when you have a town centre situation, those figures go up or usually downwards because you have other things happening. Like I said, you have buses trying to pull in, people trying to park, other things going on within the town centre environment, which can have an impact on capacity as well.
Councillor Moyes, please.
Diana Moyes from Burrator Ward. I've got three things here, not all to do with Burrator. I live in Lidford, and during the holiday season, we actually had traffic jams in Lidford. However, going back to the speed limits, I'm very keen, and I think it was being taken forward at one point, but it seems to have died a death. Single track roads and roads that don't have a line down the middle, in other words, narrow roads, it seems sensible to me to have 30-mile-an-hour limits on them. Now, especially in Lidford, people are walking all through the village and out towards the Mucky Duck area with their dogs and what have you. And I seem to think it's very dangerous when people are zooming along there at 50 miles an hour. Is there any future for a 30-mile-an-hour limit on such roads?
Not a default 30, no. We have something called our SCARF process, which is a speed compliance review forum, which we work with the police to look at speed limits in towns and villages and other areas. And we look at we do speed measurements normally about what the speeds are currently and how that correlates with the current speed limit. And then we make a determination on what we feel the correct speed limit for that town or village should be. Now, people tend to drive at a speed they feel comfortable at on a road. So quite often, if I'm trying to work out a natural speed limit for a road, I'll take my eye off the speedometer, drive along the road, and then look down and see what speed I'm doing. And that quite often gives you an indication of how people perceive the speed limit on that road. And putting in just a change in the speed limit quite often doesn't change that. All it does is creates a headache for the police and an expectation from pedestrians that speed limits will be lower than they actually are. So there's no plans for blanket 30, but we are looking at specific areas.
Ho-hum. The other thing is, coming down, and it was especially brought to my attention driving in half an hour ago, the Butchers Park development, when that was built, the speed limit was reduced to 30 past it. There was a pavement that was put in and ends on a bend, which seems a ridiculous idea to me. However, especially during the summer, people are coming along on a very light road and suddenly you go into darkness and they immediately slam their brakes on and are disorientated. Are you happy with the situation there?
Like I said before, I'm not part of our planning team, so I wasn't involved in negotiations with that.
Okay.
But I understand there was quite a lot of backwards forwards about getting a pedestrian route. Because I think at one time there was a route proposed for the allotments for that site, but I wasn't directly involved in that, so I can't comment, I'm afraid.
Could you raise it with whoever is, please?
Yeah.
And finally, I was a bit surprised about this, but the National Park refused a planning application for someone to take a car off the road and park alongside the house. Various reasons it was turned down. But Walkhampton has a serious parking problem. And I was told that actually parking in that aspect is down to the Highways Department.
I don't know the specifics, I'm afraid. Like I said, I wasn't expecting to talk about planning today, and I don't deal with planning. But I think we give
Parking?
I think we give advice to the district councils for a certain number of development. I think it's 5 dwellings or less. And we give standing advice, and we deal mainly with the larger developments. So I don't know if Devon County Council would even have been involved in that application.
No, I'm not worried about the application. It's just the issue of parking in that village. Obviously, people have more and more cars these days, and people who live there just cannot find anywhere to park. What would you suggest we do?
Have less cars. I don't know. I mean, there are problems with these villages, like I said, where they have developed over time. People buy more and more cars. It's not uncommon for one dwelling to have 3 or 4 cars these days. And the roads weren't designed for that level of use. I don't know why parking's being refused. I suspect it might have been a visibility issue or something like that, but I don't know in that particular case why that was refused.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hibbsy, you wanted to come in just on the Butcher Park issue. Could you
Yes, I
hold
did.
your other question for later, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just on Councillor Waser's penultimate question, you very kindly, Mr. Fewings, offered if we send you some examples of planning issues that have been affected by highways. I've been scribbling down a bit of a list here. Number 2 here is Emlyn Grange, so I'll make sure that you do get the information you need on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Crozier, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Crozier, Beer Ferrers and Galworthy. The first one, I've got two, please. I have a road, a crescent in Beer Alston. On one of the bottom corners, there's a double drain in front of this driveway. And because it's a driveway, it's a low curb. Now, when we have heavy rain, it swoops over past the drain and down this guy's driveway. He does try and sandbag it when he knows there's heavy rain coming, but that isn't always the case. And his garage gets flooded up to 2 feet plus. And once his garage is full, it goes down the side of the house. This is the sort of issue that we're talking about when we have heavy rain and the consequences. And I don't think it's really the insurance company of that householder who should be footing the bill in trying to sort this out.
Mr. Crozier, can I just ask if there's a question?
Yeah, there's
you're
questions
getting
coming.
into a lot of
The question's
detail,
coming now.
and that's not fair.
The question's coming now. I'd like this to be looked at by somebody in order to try and help this particular resident. The other problem we have is in Galworthy, at the school and the parish hall are next to each other on the road that shortly after the main road between Tavistock and Gunners Lake. And it's a popular school, and nobody lives close to that school. So consequently, when the children arrive at the school or are picked up at the school in the afternoon, we have an awful lot of cars double parked along that road, which is good because it slows the rest of the traffic down. But the parents of the school would like to have the highway away from the school tarmacked, and instead of being mud and stones and puddles at this moment in time, in order to make it easier to egress the cars or enter the cars when the schools. They're quite prepared to put money to it, but what we're finding is that it's very difficult.
Councillor Crozier, I'm really sorry to stop you, but I think that's more of an issue that you should be taking up with Councillor Sellis and working together that way.
Thank you. We have, and it has been brought to Councillor Hughes and to officers' attention over the years. However, I fully support Councillor Crozier bringing it to this meeting, Chairman, because I've put locality budget towards it, and Tom Lee has looked at it and said, and I've been out with him on site visits, and he agrees that it would be great to have get it done, but there's no funding for it. So we are actively looking at fundraising. However, this is the heart of Gulworthy Parish Council, and we highlight it again in this meeting, and perhaps with respect to you, Chairman, we could take it out of the meeting, but I think you can see how strongly residents and local councillors feel about this. So for brevity then, if you an agreement, I didn't want to take over Councillor Crozier, but this is the most time-consuming issue at Gulworthy at the moment. I've had many in the past which we've been able to resolve. However, I support Councillor Crozier here and the residents.
Could I just ask, there's quite a lot of actions coming my way. Is someone recording all of these? Okay.
Well, I'm making notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not exactly, but it is being recorded, isn't it? Thank you very much.
Hayworth, you're next.
I'm Councillor Nikki Hayworth from Chagford. The A382 during the summer has been a kind of continual nightmare of traffic jam. A particular pinch point, the point where you turn off the A382 to go up to Castle Drogo, and you've got Sandy Park right there. If you have the wood lorry going in one direction and a lot of puzzled tourists coming in another direction, no one goes anywhere. I mean, if you look at that road, it's stationary for great long chunks of time. Could you tell me how much a set of traffic light costs? Because I think traffic lights at that point would make an enormous difference to a huge number of people's use of that road. Thank you.
That's a difficult question because traffic lights depend on the road layout, and that's quite a tricky road layout there, particularly because you've got the four-way junction at the bottom of the hill. So I can't give you an accurate figure, but a similar junction we've done recently was in the region of about £140,000.
How on earth can it cost £140,000 to put traffic lights in?
They're very expensive items. The controllers have to be bought from abroad, have to be specially set up. They are very expensive items.
They're made in this country?
I think they're made in Germany, but I don't know for sure.
I don't know why we accept things that we all need to cost such outrageous sums. And when you were talking earlier about trying to get agreement about lowering the speed, why do you need hundreds of people to sign bits of paper and each individual roundel being looked at as if it was a work of art? I mean, why do we do things like this?
Because we have to work within the law. I mean, that's the bottom line. We have to work within the Highways Act, which, particularly for signs, road marking, speed limits, is very prescriptive and really makes it very hard to do anything that's not prescribed in the Act. And mostly it's aimed at urban areas. It's very difficult to put in things on rural areas.
A case for bonfire of the red tape or whatever, doesn't it? It really does. Sorry, thank you very much for your help on that.
Mr. Molyneux would like to come in at this point, please.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly there's a lot of feeling from members on individual issues, and I'm just wondering, Chair, whether it might be more useful if we sort of take an action for members to come back and compile that list rather than go through each one, and it's probably a little bit fair on Mr. Fewings to expect him to know every issue in it, although he's done a good job so far in terms of understanding every issue and what the solution may or may not be. So I don't know what you think of that suggestion. But I've got two questions. One relatively simple, which is you talked about the changing in terms of how you structured the budgets. I think it was something matters or whatever it is. What was the doing what matters? It would be really helpful if you could circulate some explanation of that to the committee, because that would be really useful to explain to the parish councils as to how that works. So if you could perhaps circulate the strategy around that so that members are armed with that, if that's possible?
Yeah, it's been to all of our HATOCs, our area traffic orders committees already.
Right.
So I think there's a presentation I could pull out quite readily for that. So,
okay, that would be helpful.
Okay.
And then my observation from listening to some of the conversations is there does seem to be this disconnect between planning and you guys as operations. So the planning of the highways in terms of relation of the operation of the highways. And I just wondered if it feels like a disconnect from the way you're describing it. I just wondered whether you feel that it is a disconnect or whether there is a join up, because I can't see where that join up is at the minute.
There is a artificial disconnect because the planning team works in one part of the service and the highways team works in another part of the service. In the pre-COVID days, I was able to walk down to their office and discuss things with them, but recently it's not been so easy to do that. So there probably is a disconnect, and we do try and solve that. I mean, one thing that I do is I have regular meetings with the planning officers to try and understand what possible developments coming up and whether there's anything we can get in terms of highway improvements from Section 106 or other monies from developments. But yeah, they are different teams.
Chair, if you permit me, the last part of that question, because I think, again, it seems like a disconnect because it's not been mentioned so far, is then the links to climate change and the reduction of cars on the road and Devon declaring a climate change emergency and how that links into the traffic management and the traffic planning.
So as a county council, we've been promoting cycling, public transport, walking for years, and we have had some successes, but it's limited. Where we tend to put in good cycling and walking facilities, people do tend to use them. But again, most of those are in urban areas. And it is difficult for people in rural areas to access works and services by public transport because quite often public transport isn't there. So it is a difficult equation. But we do have strategies, like I say, about opening up Oakhampton rail station for use. We are trying to provide alternatives for car use. It's really difficult to get people out of their cars.
Just to ask from there, has there been any progress? Because this used to be a rolling item on our agenda, and Councillor Andrew Davis has been to see us and talked about this and sent updates on the A386 cycling route. Is that Councillor Hughes? Because he's a cycling enthusiast. Yeah.
Whereabouts? Oh, the Drake's Trail. I know that one. Tavistock to Plymouth.
This is the one that goes along the main road. I've sent you details of it, Councillor Hughes.
Right.
A couple of times with Councillor Davis.
Let me have a look, and I'll get back to you on that one.
Yeah, I believe that Dartmoor National Park are involved. What's it Estates? Councillor Moyes, I'm looking at you. Maristow Estates. There's a whole group working on it, and Sustrans.
I think Councillor Sanders, Phil Sanders, may be working on that. So, yeah, I've been involved slightly insofar as Councillor Sanders and I have been wanting to get better cycle route actually on Roborough Down. But there is work going on, I believe. I'm not as involved as I've clearly demonstrated because I'm not able to give you nitty-gritty. I've got enough to do with Tavistock and Galworthy. So I'll do a hospital pass to Councillor Sanders.
This is fundamentally, Councillor Hughes, a commuter route to get cars off the road. So it is running parallel with the A386 from Yelverton through to Roborough. It's then going to join the large housing estate that's a couple of thousand houses up on the end of Roborough Down, that area, and it's going to join into there for people to cycle through. So it will be ideal for everybody on the Plymouth Science Park working at Derriford Hospital, because it will then fall into joining the other Plymouth cycling routes that are already there. But it is just getting the bicycles off the A386, which can cause hold-ups as you weave in between them. And it would also be an awful lot safer for the cyclists.
If I may, for members, an update. Dave Black did give the Hattock an update, as I recall, a while back, and there is going to be hopefully park and ride facilities at Yelverton and things like that. That's the type of plan that's being looked at. Okay, I hope members find that useful. But there is work going on. I don't know what the update is.
Councillor,
I'll get you an update on that, Chair.
thank you very much
Okay, no
indeed,
problem.
Councillor Hughes. Councillor Radcliffe, please.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Barry Ratcliffe, and I'm the joint councillor for the Exmoor ward, but I'm also a member of the DM&L committee. And my question, and the simple one, is really within that role. It is about the understanding the yardstick which you use as a county authority to advise on proposed developments which have been submitted for planning. Now, I've only ever seen, I think, one in my time, which is reinforce an objection. The majority of them say no comment. Now, we've had examples from two people in here of the dangers which are going on, and we've been repeatedly told by the engineer who is attending that the yardstick is the number of crashes or accidents which occur there, if they're serious or they are minor, and the main one is the number of deaths. And that is the only reason which we are told they assess. Now, I find it hard to believe that is the only yardstick, but can I ask you, and this is the question, are there other yardsticks in which you assess these? Because it's not only the planning committee and the members of that committee, a lot are here at the moment, but also in the parishes and in the towns of the areas, who the majority of the, I suppose, reasons they feel quite strongly about planning objections is the effect it may have traffic and on the safety of people. Thank you, Chairman, and probably Mr. Fewing will take this one.
Yeah, I think Phil Townsend is your highways.
I am, yes, he is, yeah. But I don't want to quote him. But.
Okay, I mean, he would be better placed to answer that, because I'm afraid I just don't know the answer to that. Certainly when I looked at planning, we weren't looking in terms of accidents, we were looking in terms of road capacity and in terms of highway design. So I would be surprised if that's the case, but I mean, I can discuss that with Phil if you want me to.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to fully understand, because it is important, and it is important in representing the people of West Devon. So perhaps we can take that further. Perhaps I can write to you, and you can perhaps go into more detail of how exactly the assessment is made, which comes to our planners, who are really saying, basically, it'll be a brave man who overrules county highways. Thank you, Chairman.
I think Phil...
Mr. Fewings, can I just ask you to pop your microphone on, please?
It was on, sorry. Yeah, Phil Townsend would be the best person to write to, because he'll know exactly what criteria he uses.
Thank you, Mr. Fewings, and thank you, Chair.
Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Paul Vashon, Oakhampton South. As you all appreciate, we have quite a lot of single-track minor roads in Devon. But how do you prioritise those minor roads for repairs, as they seem to be continually degrading? We don't seem to get a lot of repairs on some of the very minor roads. They're used by farm traffic quite a lot, but is there a sort of a formula that you use for prioritising those, or is it you have to, is whoever shouts loudest, or what?
There's a whole raft of measures we use. We have our neighbourhood officers who are aware of their local network. That's one part of the equation. We have our scanning devices we use. So we have two different types of scanning device that goes out. One measures road deformation, one measures cracking and surface deterioration. And that information is put together to produce a map of the whole of the county in terms of road condition. But unfortunately, we inevitably do treat our major roads first normally, and we do have some minor roads which are in a fairly poor state of repair, and I can't say with the current funding levels we've got when we'll be able to get out and repair them. We keep them going as best we can, but there are a point now where several of them do need quite extensive work, and quite often patching isn't enough anymore. So yeah, I'd like to say yes, we do have a programme for minor roads, but we just don't have the money to do that these days.
I understand that, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
keeps switching off. I don't know why.
Thank you, Chair. Determined to get our money's worth while you're here. Forgive me for not introducing myself when I spoke last time. Steve Hipsey from Tavistock North here. Building on a comment I think Councillor Wood made earlier on about, I think it was her, about speed limits, and we were talking about the speed limits on Dartmoor. I wonder if you can help us a little with understanding the criteria for 20-mile-an-hour limits in rural, urban areas. I noticed in a recent visit over to the Kingsbridge area, that part of South Hams, there seem to be an awful lot of villages that have got themselves 20-mile-an-hour limits through there. What sort of decision-making process is there to decide whether a town road, a street, requires a 20-mile-an-hour limit, please?
So we have a lot of historic speed limits, which probably aren't the right speed limits. But what we're doing at the moment is we're doing quite a major trial in Newton Abbot, in Teambridge, looking at putting a 20-mile speed limit in a large part of the town. And we've been monitoring that to see how that works. And then we use that experience to decide what to go on and do next. So within Newton Abbot, we'll be using a number of different measures to try and slow traffic down. In some places, we'll just change the speed limit and see what happens. In other places, we'll put in a little bit of traffic calming and see how that affects traffic speeds. And then based on what comes out of that, we'll have a much better idea about what we can do in other areas.
So I read from that, if I may, I read from that there is a possibility that if that goes well, we might see 20-mile-an-hour limits in other towns within Devon?
Yeah, but it won't be, I think this trial will be 2 years before it comes to fruition.
But it's not impossible that we might. I consider that to be good news. May I just throw in another quick one more? No. Right, okay.
Just come in there.
Yes.
But if you've got any specific area that you would like considered for a 20, we have got a waiting list. We're actually compiling a list. If you'd like to speak to your county councillor, then they can actually send that through to the team, and that will be added to the list. Okay.
Thank you.
In my naivety, I was led to believe that the police have a policy where if they don't think it can be enforced, they won't support it. I don't know whether that's true.
Well, we've got to look at that one. But I think you'll find that if the speed limit could be complied with, then the police will enforce it.
Oh, that's
okay. That's my understanding by speaking to Meg Booth and Alison Hernandez. So,
right. Yeah. Well, that's encouraging news. Thanks.
You know, I'd say to anybody, if you've got somewhere you would like considered for 20, then contact your county councillor.
Marvellous. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Hipsey, for your information, the local highways officer does monitor the traffic around Tavistock. As you're a Tavistock councillor, I suspect you're referring to Tavistock. Given the amount of roadworks and congestion, you're very lucky to actually get over about 1 or 2 miles an hour in many times during the day. There are joyriders that go around which the police are aware of, and we do work closely with the police. So in fact, the local highways officer does monitor areas, and it's quite interesting when you read the data that actually it's nowhere near as fast. You've got people quoting that they perceive that people are doing sort of 100 miles an hour. You know, that obviously is over the top, but they will say, oh, doing 50 miles, and actually it can be 18 or 20 miles an hour. So it is interesting. And just to reassure you that if you have got areas specific, please ask me, because lots of other people do. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Hayward,
Email will
please.
be fine.
Thanks very much. Nikki Hayworth, Chagford. Round us, we have the roads are really broken up and an awful lot of repeating potholes. They get repaired. You see people arrive and they slap a bit of tarmac into the hole and then they disappear. And a week later, the hole is back. I was just wondering, is any research being done about trying to redesign the way tarmac is made so that it doesn't break up quite so quickly? And then the other thing is what I've watched happening. I talked to people who are working on the road, and they say it's very frustrating because they're sent out to fill specific potholes, and then there can be another pothole almost next door, and they'll fill one pothole but not the other pothole, and then a week later somebody else shows up to fill the next pothole, but the first pothole's already broken down again. And I'm just wondering who designs how these people set out to fix the roads. Is there any way we can tear up whoever instructed the way they do it now and go back to the way they used to do it, which was apparently, according to these roadmen, they used to be given a stretch of road to bring back into good shape. Then they'd be pointed at the next stretch of road, go off and do a good job. And that sounds to me like a very much more sensible way to repair the roads. But explain to me where I've got hold of the wrong end of the stick, please.
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised I tell you that because we've been telling them not to do that. We've been telling them to fill in adjacent potholes as well as part of our policy.
They told me they're specifically instructed to fill the specific hole they're directed to and no others.
No, well, that's not the instruction we give to our contractor, so there's an issue with the contractor there, which I can take up with them. We have all sorts of ways of treating highways defects. Pothole filling is one. In winter or when the road is wet, or it's quite often not the right process to use. But for minor defects, we use it, and sometimes it stays, sometimes it doesn't. We also have patching, which we do, and we've bought recently 4 what we call dragon patches. And dragon patches have like a flamethrower arrangement on the front, and they blast the pothole to melt the surrounding tarmac, so that when we put the new material in, it beds in much better. We also have companies that use velocity patching, where they effectively squirt at high pressure tarmac into potholes and patches. So we are looking at other ways. But in the winter, when the road is cold and wet, it's quite difficult to get anything to stick to it, to be honest. And that's why a lot of our potholes do fail.
You do use a sort of different recipe for tarmac in different parts of the world, don't you? I mean, where it's very hot, they have to make sure it doesn't all melt into syrup, and where it's very cold, that it doesn't get all brittle. I'm just wondering if we can adjust the recipe we use on tar in this country.
We have a materials lab constantly reviewing what we use on the highway. That's based near Exeter. But they constantly look at materials. They're looking out for new things that come on the market. One of the things we were talking about recently was fibre reinforced material to give more flexibility when we fill potholes and patches. But we are looking at different materials. Even now, this summer we had several of our roads melted because they got too hot, particularly they're on a gradient facing the sun. So we had one of the roads at Cornwood started to melt, and we had to go and put some material on top of it. So yeah, we do try and use different materials. Yeah, I mean, we are trying.
Thank you for all that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Moyes, please.
Yes, Nikki said most of what I was going to say. She's quite right. They do still fill up the potholes and leave the small ones. I live down a very small lane, and you can't avoid them. You've got to, have your car hitting them. So it seems to be a complete waste of money not to actually fill all of them in one area at a time, and it's certainly not happening.
Because that was so quick, Councillor Spettigue, and I know you can't be long because you've got to go to school and pick the children up.
Thank you, Chair. I will be very brief. This is a specific example, but really I'm just looking for your advice on how you would deal with it. Councillor Sellis and I share a ward in Tavistock, South East, and I haven't had a chance to talk to her about it yet as a borough or a county councillor, but there's a road called Lamiton Lane, which goes under a viaduct. Traffic travels in both directions, and there is a painted line which denotes pedestrian walking area through the viaduct. I was walking up it with a police officer in a high-vis jacket a few days ago, and he very nearly got run over because motorists essentially ignore the white line and drive on the piece of road which is denoted for pedestrians. If we were to look at asking for that to be changed or considered, how would we go about that? Or how would Councillor Sellis, rather?
Either through your county council or through your neighbourhood officer, neighbourhood highways officer.
Thank you. That specific area, it really bucked the trend. It's a virtual pavement, and those aren't done nowadays. I believe it was an exception many moons ago. It was a historic one. Equally, there's a big dip in the road, but that's South West Water, who have been contacted to get some drainage work sorted out there as well, which I would say might conflate the issue, but we could take this outside the meeting, I suggest. Yeah.
Thank you.
Virtual footways were a trend about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
They never really worked. They were quite dangerous, and so we've taken some out, and we don't put any more in at the moment.
Yeah, we need a proper pavement.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, Councillor Hughes and Mr. Fewings. I would just like to say I'm a domiciliary carer, and some of the roads I drive on, and the £70 new wheel I had to have for a pothole in Buckland Monacorum, that's as you go up the hill, I can understand some of the roads in our lanes are really appalling, and quite a lot of the company that I work for, our teams have had cars damaged through the state of the road. So yes, we can really understand, but also understand the county position of being able to afford to be able to get rid of all the potholes. But, you know, it is a concern when you've got people driving to and from to go and look after people, etc., and the roads are just so poor. But unfortunate is the times we live in. Thank you both for giving up your time this afternoon. It has been really very much appreciated. I'm sure the committee secretary will send details through to you of specifics for you to get back to us on. But thank you very much, and for the time once you get back to the office that you're going to need to spend on West Devon. It is most appreciated.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Chairman.
Yep, thank you.
Right, if we can move on, everyone, to item 7, which is the Lamiton Housing Report. I believe Councillor Radcliffe is going to introduce. So if you could join us at the front of the meeting, please. And Mr. Brooke, oh, he's there. Yes, please, Mr. Brooke. Okay, gentlemen, you both. Oh, hang on. That's correct.
Great, thank you,
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, for bearing with me. I think this report and the recommendation on item 7 is something which I think most of the members will be familiar with, the details. It was reported previously to Hub, and this report really is only re-providing that information. The recommendation on it is on item 1, which is 1.1 to 1.4. I think that is again straightforward, and I think most or all of the members will have read this and been familiar with the report. So I think, Madam Chairman, I won't read all the way through it all, but we were pleased to take any questions which perhaps members have. Thank you.
Councillor Moyes, please.
Under 4.8, it said, over a period of time, a strong local opposition to the site has developed. For what reason? Do they not think houses should be built on that site, or what?
With your permission, Chairman? Well, it's a multitude of reasons, but if you look for any development in any community, you can usually find people that don't like it, and they usually live quite close to it. And I think it's no more complicated than that, to be honest, although there are subtleties around a difference in view of what sustainable development looks like and where they go in the community. So there's, people will, if you consult on a neighbourhood plan, there's always a view. When we consult on the joint local plan, there was always a view. So, but it was essentially a difference of opinion on where development in the village should occur. I hope that's acceptable.
I just think it says a strong local opposition. I mean, we're all used to, and quite understandably, people living alongside objecting to it, but it sounds as if it's a bit wider than that.
Sorry, Leader, I thought you were waiting to go in a queue, but I'll let you answer that one.
I can comment through you, Chair, if that's okay. I think with this particular instance, the site and the plan became embroiled within the neighbourhood plan. The parish council accepted the principle of an exception site, and it was then included by the then neighbourhood plan group as part of the solution to Lamiton's neighbourhood plan. For various reasons, there were an opposition developed to the plan and to that site, and it did become quite intracted and quite divisive, I think, within the community. So I think that was the reason for it becoming a strong resistance, that there was a lot riding on it.
Thank you.
Councillor Jury. Councillor Pearce, please.
Madam Chairman, I'm not a member of the committee, so if you want to take committee members first, I'd be quite happy with that.
No, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. From my point of view, I was quite disappointed, actually, in this report and review, because it echoes what we were presented with at Hub. And I just felt that, there was, we could end up in difficulty here if a private developer comes along and puts in a planning application on that site. And I'm just wondering then how it will be viewed in the public domain. And given one of the issues that came forward here was the cost of housing in Lamiton, am I to assume from that the cost of housing in Lamiton is much cheaper than it is in other areas, or was at that time? And that's why it was not viable to go ahead with that scheme, because that was the main reason, was the viability of the actual scheme.
From my understanding, the viability also came up because I know everybody uses it, is post-COVID, and as we all know, construction costs have just gone through the roof. And I think Mr. Brooke can elaborate a bit more for me, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that on the first point, I think that is unfortunately a consequence of not concluding what we set out to do in terms of assessing a housing need, establishing a housing need in the community, and then not developing to meet that need. And that is really unfortunate. I think that is something that, we never set out to do. And it's an issue that the community are still grappling with. And, that is nothing that we're proud of. I know that the support to the neighbourhood planning group is being provided by officers of the Borough Council, and to hopefully they will, from that sort of low point, bring forward something that the community can get behind. So I think you raise a very good point there. But the point on viability, which the chairman rightly brings up, was a mixture of factors. So on the one hand, it's what's the ultimate value of the properties in that community, and that was based on three assessments by three different estate agents, essentially, or valuers. We took a sort of middle of the road price. And it's lower than in some other parts of the borough, but it's higher than, it's median, probably. So that was one factor. We couldn't, it doesn't have the very, very high values. And the other factor was the cost of infrastructure associated with the development, which you can see in the report went from an estimate at the beginning based on kind of what you might expect for a scale development of, some hundreds of thousands up to in excess of 1 million based on local factors. And it was the development of the understanding of the site, which can only come over a period of time, which led to us going as far as we did. So you do a level of appraisal at the beginning, and you make an assessment that it looks like it's viable. You then do topographical surveys, you refine your layout, you engage with the planning authority, you refine your layout, you understand the constraints of the land, any land ownership issues. You then have to amend how you get into the site, and ultimately you do ground investigation works and water monitoring, and that then informs your drainage design. And then, as it turns out here, unfortunately, the drainage design became quite large, quite complicated, and quite expensive. So where there are multitudes of gateways you go through on these types of developments, and they're really long and they're quite extensive, we walked through a lot of them before we finally got to one that we couldn't go through anymore. And it is really unfortunate. It's definitely not a good thing, but it's right to stop at the point where you get to a gateway where you have an unsustainable in financial terms development, rather than having to say, okay, well, we tried, but unfortunately on this case we have failed. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you very much. Just for your information, there's a property next door to our proposed Brantor site, which has come on the market this week for just short of £500,000. And that is a former 3-bedroom extended council property, council house. So that gives you an indication of what's going on in the borough at the moment. It's quite scary.
Right, that is a bit scary. Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Councillor Edmonds, it's you, but you've been flashing for ages. Councillor, it's not coming through onto the... No, Mr. French is just getting you a new microphone.
Okay, that's better. So really, I think my question is about the viability calculation. Obviously, I recall this coming through to Hub and the recommendation at that time. The build cost, for example, in November 20, £4.5 million. Clearly, that will have changed. House prices, as we've discussed, have no doubt gone up, and that was a factor in the viability calculation, and of course other costs as well, the drainage, etc. So my question is really, I guess this scheme could be described as lying dormant. I don't think we've abandoned it completely, hopefully. So if the neighbourhood planning group, and I read that they are considering carrying out a fresh housing needs survey, should that survey demonstrate an affordable housing need in Lamiton, will we revisit the viability of this scheme and bring it up to date in terms of construction costs, property values, etc., to revisit that? And if viability is still found to be challenging, will we consider perhaps modular housing as a way of perhaps reducing the build costs? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. We have the benefit of all the information for the site, so in that regard, we can pick that information up at any time. But I think one of the really important things we do is learn through this process. And so I think it's really important that whatever we do in the future, be it something or nothing, it's aligned to what the neighbourhood plan's views are and the support of the parish and the community. And it reinforced to, I mean, I always knew development of any kind was going to be challenging, but it really reinforced just how challenging it is. And whilst I strongly believe that doing more to deliver housing for our communities that they can afford is a good thing, fundamentally councils are not well equipped to do that. And that's just simply because rightly we have to respond to community pressure effectively. We wouldn't be doing a democratic job if we didn't. So we recognise the problem and the challenge and we want to address it. But if we want to address it successfully in the future, I think we probably need to have a little think about the best way to do it. And that might be through doing what we do well in terms of ascertaining the need and supporting the community and finding other delivery partners perhaps to do some of the more cut and thrust challenging aspects. But that will of course be a political decision, and if the opportunities are there, I mean, if I find opportunities, if the teams find opportunities for us to do good things around the affordable housing challenge for the borough, I would rightly want to bring it to your attention through the portfolio holder and the leader. So I don't think I've quite answered your question, if I'm honest, but I think it will depend on the outcome of the community is probably where I'm at with it.
So just check my understanding of that response. So are we saying it is dormant rather than concluded in terms of this scheme, particular scheme?
We're not actively working on it at the current time, Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds, and thank you for your input into that before we got to your question, because I think that helps other members with your financial hat on. Thank you. Councillor Vachon, please, then Councillor Coulson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I haven't been au fait with this. Obviously, I've come into the new council, the new committee here, and this is probably the first time I've ever come across this Lamiton project. Do I understand that we've spent this £139,000 and that is a total loss, or is there anything that can be recouped from that, whether it be surveys or anything that we could use for the future?
Thank you, Councillor Vachon. Unfortunately, the reality is that a very small amount of it is recyclable in terms of knowledge and use. Essentially, some of the housing type work we did, so developing a product that can be plonked on a site and used anywhere to meet the standard of housing that we were aspiring to build. So we did quite a lot of work on ensuring that they were going to be low carbon, they were going to be cheap to run, because there's no point in building a house that you can afford to buy but then can't afford to live in. So they were going to end up, we wanted to produce something that was way above building regulation standards. So some of that work we still have the benefit from, but a lot of the rest of the work was specific to the site. So unfortunately, in the context of the money we spent, it's reasonable to say that most of that has been spent and we have to chalk it up as unsuccessful.
Thank you.
Councillor Coulson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've recently tried to buy my own house, just broaden this debate a little bit, and found it very hard to stay in Tavistock, where I'm living in Tavistock now. I want to stay in Tavistock. There's been a huge amount of inflation in the housing market over the last 18 months or so, especially in certain centres, Tavistock being one of them. And we've heard about Brentor as well, in particular. A piece of land there costs more than houses in Plymouth. So it's not just Lamiton. The housing register is those very low-income families, as it's described, who have a certain high to low housing need and so on. But this isn't just something that affects them. It's actually in the middle earnings bracket as well, where people are now struggling to stay in the town. They want to move. I need a large bedroom for my youngest daughter, for example. It's really stretching everybody, and it feels a little bit like the area's become the playground of Londoners for second homes or people wanting a change of lifestyle who have the money to outcompete local people. So it's a shame about Lamiton, it really is. But are we actively seeking opportunities in other areas for this kind of housing? I know we have our developments chalked up with developers, but I feel very strongly that most of that housing is not suitable for local people. It's too expensive. It's too expensive for people who really work and live here. Are we looking at other opportunities in other areas, if not Lamiton? Where else?
Thank you, and right to widen debate, because my personal view is exactly the same as yours. Housing affordability is worse now than it has been for probably ever. And if you look at the graphs of housing affordability, so median house prices to median earnings, you have England at 6, you have the Southwest at 8, you have Devon at 9, and you have West Devon at 9.5, or wherever it's 10, perhaps, where it's particularly acute in this part of the world. So I 100% agree with you. I think we have to think about what levers we can pull. So we have, and in spite of that, we have a backdrop of a very successful joint local plan where we are delivering our 30% of affordable housing policy compliance schemes. We're above our housing delivery target numbers. So we're doing, the government asked us to have a joint local plan, a plan. We've got a joint local plan that thinks holistically around the area, and we're succeeding to deliver against that. So it's a really positive position. And yet still, we have the issues that we are both discussing. I think there is some high-level lobbying we need to do. We need to think about what fair looks like, and then we need to ask the government that question. You have less acute second home issues, but there are second home issues. So if you have a second home, for example, and you rent it or have it available for rent for more than 140 days a year, you pay business rates, not council tax. But you don't actually pay the business rates because you're exempt from it because it's small business rates relief. So there's a sort of loophole there, which is being deliberately or not, benefited from, and I think it's something that perhaps should be addressed. I think as we are at the midpoint of the joint local plan, we need to be thinking, and we are thinking. So Councillor Mott will be attending a session with other councillors across the joint local plan area on Friday to look at what our future policies might be. Now, anything we do has to be within the remit of kind of the framework that government sets us, and that is obviously a challenge. But if we have the evidence base to support it, then we'll be looking to see what the best outcomes from the future joint local plan will be. We have the opportunity to form a housing company. It's something that's been sort of discussed. And if we did do that, then the opportunity to own and rent houses at LHA rates is there for us to consider. But each individual decision would have to be based on a business case. It's expensive. The paybacks are slight. So it's definitely not without its challenges. So there are levers that can be pulled, and it's good to know that it's issues that exercises the members, because it's something that I think we'd all like to tackle. I mean, communities stop being communities when people can't move there with their children and send them to the school. And so that's where we need to support those in most need, but we also need to support communities to stay sustainable. And I think that's the area of focus that certainly we are considering in every opportunity we have in a policy context.
Those figures you just mentioned there, 9.1 or something in West Devon, 9 across Devon, and so on. Where are they? Sorry.
They're actually available. They're available through. Can I circulate them to all members?
That'd be brilliant. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, that would be good, because we used to get them quite regularly, actually, those figures, because, some parts are even 10, 15 times your salary, so it's really quite gruesome. Mr. Molyneux would like to come in a moment.
Thank you, Chair. Just building on what Mr. Brooks said there. Clearly through the new corporate strategy, homes is a big feature. The whole strengthening communities, living in the communities, key part of that. We are looking within the organisation of how we look at the resources that we have from an officer perspective to ensure that we put more resources into the housing elements of the corporate strategy. So we are in the process of doing that, and we're going to be making some changes to the teams starting next week in terms of prioritising housing. And certainly Mr. Brook will be leading in terms, he's got the corporate responsibility for leading on housing. So we've given it a senior leadership team sponsorship it will have additional, well, not additional resources, but certainly reprioritise resources on that function as well. So we recognise the seriousness of the problem, and it's an issue for everybody.
Thank you. Just expanding on that, from my local knowledge of here is the private rental market is also becoming very difficult. A lot of people, landlords, are either looking at the opportunity to sell the property because the market is so buoyant, or they're turning them into Airbnbs. And if you look up Airbnbs for your village or town, the number for Tavistock is incredible of Airbnbs. I mean, as most of you know, I live along Fitsford. There are 2 just there. I mean, you know, and they are so busy. They are constantly busy. And, you know, this is what people are doing because they can make more money at it. Unfortunately, it's taking housing away from local residents who want to come here and to live, or have lived here all their lives. They want to settle down and have families. And in a lot of cases, it is precluding them from doing so. I only said the other day, my daughter can't afford to buy around here. She's moving to Kilcampton, you know, and it's a scary price paying for a first-time home. And as a parent, it does cause worry. But, you know, this is where we as a council, and we always prioritise housing, and we have done for donkey's years on this, in this authority, that it is so important. We need to keep our residents here. We need to keep our villages alive and sustainable. It used to be, if you had the village pub, the shop and the the shop and the post office and a school. And some of those have all gone, and a lot are just left with a school with only a handful of children. I think Lidford sometimes goes to about 15, doesn't it, Councillor Moyes? It's not always a high number. I know there's small schools out in Councillor Samuel's area and things like that. So we have got to be able to seriously look at, even if it's like infilling as a council, if you look for, as I do, because I'm a sado with housing, if you go through a village and look, you can always tell where the social housing was. And there's like some places, there's just a terrace, but that terrace achieved the need. But unfortunately, with what happened with Margaret Thatcher years ago, the properties were sold off, the housing authorities or the councils never reinvested because it topped up their budgets. And actually now we are all paying for it, because those council houses that are being sold on again now, you know, they are just worth, as Councillor Pearce has already quoted, £500,000. So it really is an important element to this. And just to finish off, I think from, sorry, Councillor Wood. Councillor Sellis.
Thank you. You know, you're in good swing there. I think as a council with responsibility for planning, and I've already spoken this with the portfolio holder, that we shouldn't be frightened about developing higher rise buildings. Now, I'm not talking multi-storey, you know, 20, 30 story developments, but we do need to be, land is what is expensive, and I know if I were on my own, I wouldn't necessarily need the accommodation which I have at the moment, which is great. I would love to be able to afford it and keep it and everything like that, but to be quite brutal, the way the town council at Tavistock and West Devon Borough Council keeps in, and Devon County we're having to increase council tax, I think it would be very difficult for me if I were on my own to justify or actually be able to afford necessarily to stay there. So what sort of accommodation? You don't want horrible accommodation, but you look here. I mean, I hate this room. I absolutely hate this building. But look at the glorious sunshine just peeping in here. We need to design houses which are light and airy and good places to live and higher density. And I don't think that we should be necessarily putting these all over green fields. We should really be considering building up, and we can still landscape and do things like that. I don't think we should be frightened of that. So, you know, we're not going to be able to afford and keep people locally otherwise. I think we need to be more, I don't know, ambitious. You know, we think we've been very restricted with some of the choices of houses.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Sellers. Councillor Wood.
Thank you. This is a great debate to be having, and a great time to air worries about housing, and I think we all probably have them. I was talking to Councillor Ratcliffe earlier actually about key workers and the issue we have in the county with key workers coming to work here. We are short of key workers, particularly in the health profession, but also education. And anybody offered a job from another part of the country who then wants to come down and work here often can't take that job because there's no housing for them. That was happening a lot in Cornwall over the summer, and it's happening in Devon now. So I'd really like to see, because those systems, our education system and our health system, are teetering really at the moment as well. And if we don't have, the workforce is under a lot of pressure and a lot of them are going. So if we don't have new workers, they are going to collapse. And I think we need to take that into account with the housing at the moment. And that also includes people who are training in those jobs. So trainee teachers, trainee pharmacists, trainee nurses, everyone who needs to have placements in this area. We can't provide them with training placements. They're not attracted to come and work here. So, I know there's no answer with housing, but can we, incorporate that into our discussions for some kind of key worker housing allocation? Thank you.
Thank you. If I may just come in and an interesting debate. Following on from what Mr. Brooks has said, and I'm completely supporting going through, currently, currently there's a meeting being arranged to look at really all of the sites which our Western Borough Council own, and by that I'm really more interested in very small sites, very tiny sites. Sites on brownfield, sites within towns. There's a lot of nice sites in the major towns around here, but also in the parishes. And I think that if you own the site, then sort of logic seems to me to dictate that you've taken an enormous amount of cost away from building. And those sites can be some for, I'm not thinking of lots of buildings, I'm thinking you could start with one dwelling, which is affordable or social, whichever you want to call it. And I think it is a small target to start this going, because I agree. I think that the houses which were sold off in the 70s weren't replaced, and I think that was to me was unfortunate. Bearing in mind what I saw through, I suppose, my early years, the way people were living, particularly after the World War, the Second World. It's a very quiet fire alarm, or I don't know what. Yes, during. The prefabricated houses which were built towards the end of the Second World War, and again, which I said earlier on, of course, we should be looking at prefabricating houses. We should be building houses which are carbon neutral. They should be, as I say, prefabricated to become on the back of a lorry and be constructed. There's a very good example at present in Truro, where they've taken the viaduct car park, stop the parking there, and there's really they're just almost like containers or mobile homes, but they've made a start and they've put them there and they have them there working well in the centre of the town. People don't have cars, they don't need those, they have their bicycles and a shed, and it's working well. So that's something I want to look into as to what is achievable and to do as a council. We are also, I think there are 3 councillors in here who are showing concern that some Live West properties are being sold for whatever reason. 2 certainly that I know of in my ward. And again, currently there's a meeting being arranged with a director of Live West to really raise this as a policy and as to what is really going on there. How are they replacing these houses? I mean, I hope the answer will be equal or better in whatever it is, but we do need to know what is happening there. We're also arranging discussions with other providers because we think, you know, we'll keep trying to reinvent the wheel, but to try to find out what other providers are doing in this part of the southwest to really create a better and affordable environment. I think the suggestion on high rise, well, 2-3 stories, something like that, can be very good. Stepping down a hill, taking advantage of slopes or whatever sites we have, that seems to me to be fine. And finally, I completely agree. I had a discussion earlier on, key workers are important. It's no use bringing over 3,000 lorry drivers and nowhere to put them, where them to live. So I think that, together with education and training, are fine. So we are working forward. We are working with the senior leadership team to try to find a way we can actually produce what, after all, we're all aiming for. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Where am I? Councillor Moyes, please.
Yes, Councillor Ratcliffe has raised something that I was going to raise. I don't know how often Live West are due to come to overview and scrutiny. Someone did suggest that they came on an annual basis, but I'm not sure whether that's right or not. I think them selling off the houses, and I've got an issue in my ward where they've sold off some garages, not consulting anybody about what could go in their place. And I do wonder whether they should come back to overview and scrutiny. I accept that Councillor Radcliffe has organised a meeting with them, but I wondered whether it should be a bigger discussion.
Thank you. Hold on, Mr. Molyneux tops you, I'm afraid.
Thank you. I was just looking at the. Thank you, Chairman. I was just looking at the forward plan for the committee, and we've got an examination of corporate theme 1 for the next meeting. And I was suggesting to the chair, and she agreed, that it would be good to have that as improving homes. And I think we do have Live West come annually, but we can examine the topic in more detail. And if we need them to come back or have specific questions, then I think we can have that debate at the next meeting. Thoroughly examine the whole idea of having a corporate theme examined by overview and scrutiny is to get into the detail and look at what we need to be done and what members feel need to be done. So I think, you know, this is the last 2 meetings where slightly different topics have ended up focusing on housing. So last time, I can't remember what the topic was, but we ended up talking all about housing. Can't remember, Councillor Radcliffe, you were on the Devon Home Choice, yes. So Devon Home Choice became a housing discussion. This report on Lamiton has become a wider housing discussion. So I think it's clear that the committee and members have got a clear passion about doing something about this. So I think if we have it as a specific topic at the next meeting, then I think we can examine that and also look at who we might need to talk to and it may need a working group, our task and finish group on some of this stuff. So if that's okay, Chairman.
When is the next meeting? How far away? Because you could sell a lot of houses.
19th of November.
Right.
So 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks.
Let's hope no more houses are sold in that time.
I have got Councillor Kimber, Councillor Radcliffe, Councillor Coulson and Councillor Hipsey. Oh, and did you have your hand up, Councillor Pearce? You're looking as if you did. And Councillor Sellis. And I haven't written any of those down. So what did I say?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A very simple one, which Mr. Molyneux has generally answered. Yes, it was my recollection that about 15 months ago we had a presentation by Live West, which was most interesting. And my thoughts were, if we can get to the bottom of what we want with them, then it can then be part of one which just suggested could be later in the year. So I totally agree with that. Thank you.
The Coulson, please.
Thank you, Chair. It strikes me that whilst we should attack it from this end and looking at brownfield sites and provision new housing, we're having an increasing problem, though it's not as acute in Devon as in Cornwall. I believe St Ives and possibly Paignton pain is certainly looking at this. The loophole you referred to earlier, less than 141 days a year, they get the track business rates, but then the loophole allows them to claim small business rates relief. That we, as a council,
Excuse me, and COVID payments.
And COVID payments, furthermore, that we maybe adopt a position as a council that we lobby either our MP or central government that we feel this loophole should be closed because it's our communities are suffering for it. I mean, is that something we could propose to? Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. I propose recommendations.
Right.
Apologies.
Is everybody happy with that? Yeah. You got that, Janice? Oh, right. So you need to formalise your wording.
I'll formalise my wording. Yeah, formulate. Sorry, my wording. And get back to you. But yes, essentially, in spirit, what I've just described. Yeah. Sorry, you want now the wording now. That we as a council adopt a position to lobby central government to close the loophole that allows business rates relief, small business rates relief, sorry, to second homeowners who rent their house out for their second home out less than, more than 140 days a year.
With the central government, with your consent, can we add and our local MPs? So Mel Stride, Geoffrey Cox, that's all we've got for us, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Sellis, please.
Thank you. It was just a matter of information that, as Councillor Wood was just saying about key workers, I've brought this to the virtually verbatim what you just said, Councillor Wood, and up at County, because the lack of key workers is crippling and an ageing population. In fact, I think the estate agents should have a information leaflet saying, are you aware that you're getting older, more likely to require services, and that actually we're really strapped for providing all the care. So I've said the same.
Just to take us back. Okay, thank you. To get us back to where we were on this paper, we have the recommendation, but also I would just like to say, before I ask Councillor Radcliffe, no, he can't, I need to take the recommendations forward. But there are a lot of lessons to have been learnt from this experience within this scheme for the council, and I've spoken to Mr. Brooke about this, and the council officers and politically as members, we will be learning from those lessons of, how things evolve, and we will go forward with that in mind, having, as I say, learnt the lessons of this Lamiton scheme. Thank you. Right. To formalise it then, I would like to put forward the recommendation that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee notes the follow-up report on the Lamiton scheme. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you. You're not on the committee, Councillor Radcliffe. Councillor Kimber. Thank you, Janice. All those in favour, please. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Right. Oh, yes. Can we vote on that, please? We had a proposer and a seconder for the motion from Councillor Coulson. All those in favour, please. Thank you very much. Right. And the final thing, on the agenda, we do have the update from Gemma Bristow. She wasn't able to get to the meeting. She was going to join us by Teams, but the officers, as you could see from the beginning of the meeting, were not able to connect with her for this. So a report will be sent out by Ms. Bristow to the committee secretary, and we will go from there to get the information out as quickly as possible to everyone. The next item on the agenda is task and finish groups, and we haven't got any so far this year. We seem to be actually doing them in the meeting as a whole. So the next item 10 is ONS annual work programme, including the preparation for the next meeting. So we have just discussed about the next meeting. So we have, going forward, that we will have task and finish group updates, and we still don't have any, but it's just on there. The third sector partners, Councillor Andrea Davies, Mr Damien Jones from Devon County Council, Republic Transport. And then we have a review of the localities annual report, the Community Safety Partnership annual report, and then, as we said, the council delivery against corporate theme 1 on housing. And I hope more members attend, and I'm sure Councillor Radcliffe, working with Mr Brooke, etc., will have something forward as a report for us to go forward with. We will also have our own annual overview and scrutiny report and the work programme. Does anyone else have anything they feel they would like to have for future meetings, third sector partners, etc.? Councillor Kimber.
Just saying on the council delivery against corporate theme 1, we're going to look at housing. Yeah. So I'd like to support that thing about we live west. So how would that be structured?
Mr Molyneux.
Sorry, Councillor Kimber, in terms of structure of the session, so I would suggest that we don't invite Live West to the meeting. I think we need to discuss the issues. Then, if we have a list of issues, then request Live West to come with a list of these are specific issues and concerns that we've got. We'd like you to come and present. Or, like I say, we set up a separate task and finish group and examine specific elements of housing in more detail, would be my suggestion, if you're happy with that.
I think a task and finish group, just mainly around Live West, actually could be a good idea for this committee. How do members feel about that? Don't all shout at once.
Just make a point, Madam Chair. I don't know whether I've missed this, but earlier on, I think Mr Molly was saying that we do have Live West down as a visiting body on the 26th of April next year.
We could, and then they came last January. I think it was the last January meeting. So I mean, we could bring that forward if the debate. Yeah, we could request that they could come sooner.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything that they would like this committee to take forward, please? Councillor Hipps.
Yes, the earlier discussions with our colleagues from Devon County Council, I think flagged up certain level of interest in not so much the physical highway road issues, but the planning issues that go with them. So I would welcome somebody to come and talk to us about that, probably from the planning side of Devon County Council.
It's gone dark all of a sudden when you mentioned planning and highways. Can I suggest then, looking at the fact that we've got a fairly big agenda on November and January, that actually if we were to do that, February might be a time to see. Councillor Chair, Councillor Sellers.
Sorry, Councillor Sellers.
Thank you. Just a suggestion, as this is the committee has quite a bit on, might that be an idea for the DMNL committee to actually do, which other councillors could attend? It's just a suggestion, because I don't disagree with what Councillor Hipps is saying. I just wonder if we're a bit chocker what the DMNL one is, because it would.
So, thank you, Councillor Moyes.
Sorry, Chairman, they did come to, I think, DMNL. It wasn't that long ago, and it really wasn't a very satisfactory discussion. We felt that perhaps somebody higher up the management team was setting the rules, and those that actually had to carry them out just went along with it rather than we were given a load of figures about yards and from this, that and the other, and it really made no sense at all, I don't think.
May I just inquire then, what level do you think that we're looking for then? So higher than the level that you had at your meeting, so to actually look at developments and planning as opposed to an individual planning application that, yes, you need to be 3 yards from this and 2 yards from that. You're looking for something at a higher, more...
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think I agree. It needs to be strategic, and I think we should be looking at whoever the portfolio holder is and a senior officer from Devon County to talk about how they approach it at a strategic level. Because I do think, the climate change element we didn't really touch on, and that's as equally important in terms of that wider issue. And I think we need to have a strategic conversation with Devon County. And I think, whilst I accept what Councillor Sellis says about the DM&L committee, I think it would be good to actually take it out of a planning environment and have a strategic conversation about Devon County Council's approach to planning on the roads. Would be.
I would, I'm open-minded. I was trying to be positive.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Hipsey, please.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Molyneux, for pointing that out. I totally agree with that. The reason I made the suggestion in the first place is really that there were definitely questions, I think you'll agree, that we asked our guests this morning, or this afternoon rather, that they weren't able to answer. And okay, they've gone away and they said, well, try and find out for us. But I was looking for the kind of equivalent to the two gentlemen that were with us today at that sort of level, but on the planning side rather than the pothole side, which I think if Mr. Molyneux's suggestion is taken up, will hit the spot perfectly as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, are all members in agreement with that? That's what we'd like? Right, okay, lots of nodding heads, so thank you very much. So if I leave that with you, Mr. Molyneux.